A second referendum on Brexit would do irreparable damage to people's trust in democracy. That's what UK Prime Minister Theresa May is set to tell Parliament later today when she reports back on last week's Brussels summit. With Britain and the EU in deadlock over the terms of any withdrawal, calls for a new vote are growing. But on Sunday, International Trade Minister Liam Fox warned that a second referendum was not a solution.
And it's very clear that the EU understand what the problem is. And it's a question of, without unpicking the whole of the withdrawal agreement, can we find a mechanism of operating the backstop in a way that actually removes those anxieties? And that's something, as I said, it will happen over Christmas. It's not going to happen this week. It's not going to be quick. It will happen sometime in the new year.
For instance, this needs major surgery to make it acceptable to the EU.
That was the International Trade Minister Liam Fox there. Well, let's go to our correspondent in Westminster, Tig Enright, for the latest. Good morning to you, Tig. What are we expecting from Theresa May later?
Hi there, Belle. We expect her to use some pretty tough words in Parliament today, talking about the prospect of a second referendum on Brexit, and particularly tough when you consider how much people are treating a second referendum as the only realistic way out of the logjam in Parliament over the Brexit deal. But she's going to stand up and tell MPs today that a second referendum would break the faith of the British people and do irreparable damage to the integrity of our politics. That, though, of course, is the pronouncement in public. Over the weekend, we saw several newspaper reports suggesting that Theresa May's own allies in Cabinet are laying the groundwork or considering how a second referendum might take place. Although that, I must say, was denied by the individuals involved. But people are treating the prospect of another public vote on Brexit as a growing likelihood. Mostly those on the Remain side of the camp calling for it, because they're hoping, obviously, that the option to remain would be on the ballot. And chief among them, the former Prime Minister, Tony Blair, who had this to say to Euronews' political editor, Darren McCaffrey, last week.
Never going to be a change to it. And the important thing for people in Europe to understand now is there is no Brexit proposal that's going to get through the British Parliament, in my view, and people will come back in the end to the idea of a fresh vote, because there is no other way of resolving this. And that's why it's so important that Europe starts now to think about and start preparing for the fact, I think we will in January come back, ask for an extension of Article 50 and make preparations for a new referendum.
Well, I think the momentum here in London, it really is growing towards a second referendum. One of the other things that Tony Blair said is that he saw it as a more likely outcome than not. But interestingly enough, his party, the Labour Party, the opposition party, has very much taken a different direction since his leadership came to an end. And its leader, current leader, Jeremy Corbyn, is somewhat on the fence about the prospect of a second referendum. He choosing to use the chaos in Parliament there to push for a general election to seek the opportunity for him to take power. And of course, if there were to be a second referendum, it would need to be voted on in Parliament here. We do think that there might be a majority of MPs in favour of it, but somebody's got to put it to a vote, and it really needs the cooperation of government. That's what Theresa May is going to rule out today. But don't forget that this time last week, I was stood here talking about the prospect of the vote on her deal in Parliament going ahead as planned last week. She said it would. A few hours later, she said it wouldn't.
Right, and just Tig, on that second referendum, I mean, you've touched on it there, but with all of what you've said in mind, how likely do you think it is to actually happen?
Many people seeing it as the only realistic way out of the logjam in Parliament. I mean, Theresa May's deal that she has done with Brussels really faces an absolutely uphill battle. If you consider the scale of the rebellion that there was against her leadership last week, 117 of her own MPs voting against her, and none of the other parties, apart from the DUP, which is propping up her government, although they too said they would not be voting for the deal on the very issue of that backstop. So in the absence of a general election or any other agreement being made, or perhaps somebody seizing power, it really does increasingly look like one of the a much firmer option.